Hey, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us in this video about adaptive cards. I am David Clow. We have some exciting stuff for you today.
And I'm Matt Heidinger. Yeah, thanks. We'll jump right in. We've got a lot to cover today. So here's the agenda we're going to run through. We're going to start out, give you a quick recap of adaptive cards. Then David's going to walk you through all the latest and greatest we have with templating and some designer updates. Then we're going to switch it over to Adaptive Cards V2, the first time you'll have heard that, where we talk about a new feature called Universal Actions. And then we're going to wrap it up talking about our roadmap, V3, a very early glimpse at V3 and beyond. So with that, adaptive cards, if you're not familiar, well, this is the first time we've got a video opportunity, so you could press pause now, go to adaptivecards.io, and you'd be fully up to speed because we are going to jump into some pretty cool stuff. But to make sure everyone is somewhat on the same page, adaptive cards are platform agnostic, snippets of UI authored in JSON that apps and services can openly exchange. So any platform, they can exchange them because everything speaks JSON. And ultimately, when that card is delivered to a specific app, the JSON is transformed into native UI that automatically adapts to its surroundings. So it's cross-platform, but it's always native on the app that it lands on, and it blends right in. And we'll give you a glimpse of what that looks like as well. So when we set out to build adaptive cards, we wanted to build them because Microsoft 365 apps like Outlook, Teams, Web Chat, Cortana, Windows Timeline all had these same set of requirements. They wanted to allow third-party extensibility, people to plug in UI, but they wanted to make sure their users had a consistent look and feel so that Outlook looked like Outlook and Teams looked like Teams. But we knew with the new open Microsoft, we didn't want to make it just for those apps, so we delivered the SDKs that our platforms use, you can use yourself to render adaptive cards in your own apps. And people have taken that over the years to do some pretty cool stuff. So what the heck are they? Here's a card in Teams. This is the GitHub and DevOps bot within Teams that helps bring you your content into the apps you're already using. So from here, I can easily manage pull requests. I can see if builds failed. And GitHub and DevOps use adaptive cards to bring these things, into my workflow without me having to have a bunch of tabs open. Outlook's another fantastic canvas where you see adaptive cards, things like approvals, expense reporting, submitting time off. You can do it all right from your mobile phone, right from Outlook. There's a rich suite of third-party apps that have extended Outlook using adaptive cards. And this just makes so many fewer hops to click and approve very simple things. We also saw a third-party company called Teamwork use adaptive cards to build a VS Code extension. So that card that you see on the right that blends in with VS Code, that's actually the latest task that I happen to be working on as I'm a software developer and closing out issues, all integrated directly into VS Code. Also, not just Microsoft properties, Cisco WebEx, huge conferencing software, uses adaptive cards to power their extensibility platform as well. So we knew we wanted adaptive cards to be an open standard, and this was a very exciting announcement once they made that. So everything we're going to be talking about today is really going to be centered around this overall roadmap, if you will. And it's really, we're taking a good look at the life cycle of an adaptive card. You've seen them in apps, you just saw them in Teams and Outlook, but how did it get there? And the workflow is something like this. We typically have card authors and hosts. There's usually two different parties exchanging cards, whereas in a traditional UI stack, you own the pixels. You're writing your own UI, you own them. Whereas adaptive cards is usually two different parties exchanging content. And we call those card authors and hosts. So the way it starts is the card author usually goes to a card designer and they say, hey, maybe I'm GitHub and I'm going to build the pull request card. So I go to a design tool, build what that card will look like. It creates a bunch of JSON. I can copy that then into my backend and then deliver it into Teams or Outlook in the most appropriate way. These dotted lines here where we say copy JSON, those are actually important. And as you'll see this talk evolve, we'll give you a glimpse at how we're rethinking the overall life cycle of an adaptive card and trying to streamline a lot of these processes to make it a lot simpler for you to just get your job done. So take a mental image of this picture as we'll be referring to it quite a bit. To start in the first topic, right here at the card designer and backend, that little black arrow just turned into an orange one and it became two-way. That's what we call adaptive card templating. And it really helps card authors design these reusable card templates and use them in their backend. David, could you give us a lap around what the heck is adaptive card templating?
Of course. Thanks, Matt. So templating is essentially a more efficient way to design your cards. The typical card as you author it today is a JSON payload that is ready to display. You feed it to one of our SDKs and it renders natively. In this particular example, we have a stock ticker that is designed to represent the Microsoft stock ticker at one particular time. Okay, that works, but it's not ideal. There are plenty of stock tickers out there, and I might actually want to reuse the exact same layout to represent other stock symbols. So marrying essentially the layout and the data in one single payload, not always optimal. That is what adaptive card templating is meant to solve. That payload that we just looked at can actually be generated from what we call a template. That's what you see on the left, associated or bound to a data object. Now that template is basically the same as what you've seen before, except that the data in the text properties of those text blocks has been substituted with binding expressions that make it possible for another SDK to pull the data from the data object, dynamically insert it into the JSON payload of the card, and produce the final result that you see on the right, which is basically the exact same as what we've seen before. Of course, the rendering of that payload, that final payload, is also exactly the same. But now, if you actually apply that principle to multiple data objects, all representing different stock symbols, you can replicate the same layout over and over again in a very efficient way without having to author the card n different times. And so that's what templating actually allows you to do. But on top of that, we really wanted the template engine or the template language to make it possible to do some more complex layouts that can react or adapt to certain conditions in the card. That's why, as a collaboration with the Bot Framework team, we are releasing with support for what we call now adaptive expressions, which is a rich set of functions and basic language features. It remains entirely declarative. There's no code behind, which make it possible for you to do complex things. You can see here the text property of that text block is actually authored using an expression that has an if statement. The if statement will output one particular character over another depending on the condition if the change is greater or equal to 0. The same way we can format a number as a dollar symbol, an actual currency. And if you bind that particular card extract of a card payload to the data that you see below, then that stock ticker can now have, as you can see on the bottom left of the little screenshot, some green text when the stock has gone up, associated with that green arrow that's pointing up at the beginning. So again, very complex, well, not that complex to author, but very complete set of functions. We have a couple hundred, if I'm not mistaken, that allows you to do templates that go beyond just simple field binding expressions. And I think now is the right time for Matt to actually give us a demo of all of that, including through the Adaptive Card Designer.
Okay, so everything templating and everything adaptive cards is going to live at adaptivecards.io. That's going to be your landing page for everything. If you want to start rendering cards using the SDKs, if you want to see our latest releases or our roadmap, this is your place. But we usually refer people to the samples page to really get started and see some sample cards. So here's a great activity update. We could see a great restaurant card. Maybe you're building a card to show restaurant reviews. And of course, the famous stock card. So what you're noticing from the slides David showed is that, well, this card works really great for Microsoft stock as of September 19th, probably a couple years ago. It's clearly baked in. The data's right in there. So what we added recently is this big toggle switch so you can turn on adaptive card templating. And you're going to see the payload goes from 1 to 2. Now we have a separate data payload and we have a separate JSON payload with the template. So it has all these binding expressions so I can bind to the data separately. And no self-respecting interactive developer tool would be complete without a try it yourself button. So we click try it yourself. That's going to load up the adaptive card designer. For some of you, this is the first time you've ever seen it. So I'll give you a quick tour. We've got the card payload editor and we've got sample data. This makes it so your design time experience is pretty solid. You can see what this card is going to look like with some sample data, knowing that later on in reality, you're going to populate this card with data. And we will actually show that in just a minute. So here I can see what this card looks like. I can click preview mode. And now if I change this to some other company, you'll see instantly the card designer update right there. We also added in this release of adaptive cards that a handful of really cool binding UI. So now I can select an element here. I can click bind. It's showing me all the properties of my sample data. So maybe I just really want to ruin this card and put the company name here or something. Makes it very easy to have a design time experience that aligns with the data. So let's take this card and actually build a really quick web API in a matter of minutes. So what I've got here in VS Code, this is a completely blank .NET new web API blank project that I got from basically a ASP.NET web API. And they provided all this stuff about the weather and blah, blah, blah. So what we're going to do is add a very quick method to get a card out of this. So the first thing we need to do is make an HTTP GET at the /card endpoint. We're just going to get the first forecast out of there. That's all pretty straightforward. Now what we need is to build our card. So here's the data model that they had. This is a weather forecast. So it has properties like location, date, the temperature in Celsius, and a summary. So let's go back to the designer. And I've created a JSON version of that: date, temperature, summary, it's freezing, and location. Now I've got my sample data. Next thing is we need to build a card. We've got a very simple drag drop interface to build cards. So, use this element and build your own. But to save you some time, I'm going to go ahead and paste in one that I've previously made. I've got that over here. I paste that in. And look at this. I've got a pretty good looking weather card that now I can see as the temperature changes, the card is reflecting at runtime. Now, you notice what's really neat is I'm typing in Celsius. I'm typing in 0. You'd think 0 Celsius. Well, that's 32 Fahrenheit. What you're seeing is adaptive expressions in action. And I'll show you what that looks like. If I click on this 32, this is a complicated expression I'm writing that's converting the Celsius into Fahrenheit. So I'm saying format number, take the temperature Celsius, multiply by 1.8, add 32, whatever the crazy formula is that converts Celsius to Fahrenheit. But this is pretty cool. I've now got a template that's massaging the data and displaying a really nice looking card based on the sample data. So now let's hook it all up and make it all work. So the first thing to do is for my .NET project, I'm going to do .NET add package adaptive cards templating, and I'm going to add version 1.0.0. And in this case, I have to do -0 because at the time of this recording, it's a pre-release package. So while that's installing, you won't have to do this. You just have to do .NET add package adaptive card templating. Now what we're going to do is head up here while that's loading and do the standard using adaptive cards .templating. Cool, the package is installed. I add my using. And now what I'm going to do is paste in a handful of things because what do I need? Well, first I need a template, and that's my adaptive card template. And that takes in my template JSON. We're not going to paste that in just yet. So we're going to take the template. We've got our data object. So we're going to expand this template. And to do that, we're going to do template.expand, pass in that forecast object that we had. And this can be any just C# object. And then because this is a web API, we're going to return this JSON. So we're going to return the expanded content and its application/JSON right there. Now the final step is we need to pass in our template JSON. So because I created it in the designer, now all I have to do is put it into a variable. So let's do that. We simply var template JSON, and we paste in this string here. Whoops, didn't copyright. paste in this. And then all we have to do, because of the funness of string encoding, we have to replace these quotes with these quotes, hit OK. Okay. So all I've done is taken that JSON, that template that we created from our designer, paste it into my C# variable. I've instantiated an adaptive card template object that has a method called expand. And this takes the template and expands it with data. So this would be data. I happen to be just randomly getting one because it's a simple demo. This would hit a weather API. This would get the data from wherever it needs to. And now let's go ahead and run this. And if all, I need a semicolon right there. Let's restart. And if all goes well, we will see a very simple adaptive card returned from a web API that would make it very easy for us to now send this to Teams, send this to Outlook actual messages, and now people can interact with your service directly from their own apps. So now that's loading. Let's see, we've got localhost here, and within any minute, hopefully we'll see the card populated with our weather forecast. And there it is. There's our JSON. That's our adaptive card filled with data that we needed. Now I've got this API that I've built, and I can actually do whatever I need to with it. And so that was a look at building a very simple ASP.NET app that takes advantage of templating, makes it much, much faster to build cards and then fill them with data. We've got one last thing to show you while we're here. So what I've done is switched over to the vNext designer, and at vnext.adaptivecards.io, this is where we do experimental stuff and all sorts of fun things. I've got something really neat to show you. There's two things. First is this target version selector. This makes it so if you accidentally use features that were provided in Adaptive Cards 1.2, but the host you're sending to doesn't happen to support those, now the designer, you'll get a really nice design time experience telling you that, hey, you're using features that might not work on this app. Maybe Teams or an app is waiting to roll out the latest version. So there's always that little gap between rolling out updates. There's also a whole new open card picker. So we have a new starting ground to get a new card. All the samples are right here. That's really great if I want to quickly load up a sample. What's really neat here at vnext.adaptivecards.io, our friends over at Imaginea built this really cool thing. They had all these designers working with adaptive cards. And while we think that adaptive card designer is great, it still is building JSON, and you do have to have some ability to know what you're building. It's a little more limited and restricted than a full-on, editor like maybe Adobe Photoshop or something. So they use machine learning to check this out. At the very bottom, you can click Create from Image. And what this is going to do is analyze an image using machine learning, pull out images, pull out text, pull out inputs, and create an adaptive card from it. So without me uploading a file, which I could totally upload a file of my own. They have a set of sample images that let you experience the feature. And I'll just pick this one right here, this grand buffet spread. And so this is an image. I want to stress that. These are all PNG images created with an image editing tool. When I click Convert to Adaptive Card, the image is going to be processed in the back end. We do have a privacy policy you have to acknowledge by using this that analyzes the image, finds the text, creates these inputs. These are actually a choice set input that you can actually interact with this card. I mean, this is pretty neat. This is it's early. It's why it's in a preview. They're committed to it. We'll get the source code out at some point. But what's really neat is, you can play with this and just create images and just create a card from it, at least as a starting point, and then start tweaking it. So we think this is really cool. Congratulations and kudos to that team. Hopefully you now have a better understanding of what the heck templating is and how it can save you a bunch of time. And as a quick recap of everything we just saw, we've got 3 major initiatives to really close on. The first is adaptive card templating, and we're very excited to tell you that the release candidate is now available for .NET and JavaScript. So you can get started today, and hopefully in the next month or so, we'll have everything you need to really start using templating in production. There was a minor breaking change in the syntax. We added a $sign to be a little more standard with some other binding languages. And there were some minor API changes in the SDKs, but they should all be pretty fine to replace to fix. Adaptive expressions, as David mentioned, is a new standard for writing platform agnostic expressions that can be evaluated directly on multiple platforms. If that's something you'd be interested in, check out this Learn More link. And lastly, you saw the adaptive card designer got a pretty nice new set of features with a rich data binding UI, as well as a version selector UI to help see what apps might behave, what cards might behave like on maybe down level platforms. We also saw a really cool pick to card feature, as its code name, that automatically generates an adaptive card by uploading an image. And kudos to Vasanth and crew from Imaginea. They've been huge friends and family with adaptive cards, and that was a really exciting announcement that we're hoping to polish up and get up into adaptivecards.io shortly. As always, the adaptive card designer you may have seen from previous videos can be embedded into your apps, and you can check out that link to get started with that. So that was a lap around templating. Now we're going to look at what we're calling Adaptive Cards V2. And the major feature coming with that is universal actions. So David, why don't you tell us what that is?
So thank you, Matt. Yeah, universal actions. When we said that adaptive cards work across all of those platforms, were designed for Outlook, Teams, Timeline, and even your applications, we really delivered on that. Like, you can use our SDKs, you can display cards natively wherever. But the problem is that this is just rendering that we're talking about. As you probably know, adaptive cards can include inputs and actions, and there's currently no standard way to actually run actions from an adaptive card. What that translates into is a little more complex view of the diagram that Matt showed you before. So on the left, you see a card that might show up in Teams, just a super simple scenario to close a ticket in some external system. On the right-hand side, you see the same card, but displayed in Outlook. Really, the exact same thing with a slightly different style. Under the covers, though, the payload for Teams looks like this. A body with a text block, super simple, and an action whose type is action.submit. However, in Outlook, the same exact card is defined with the same exact body, but not the same action. Here you have to use the action.http type. What that means is that if you author your scenario for Outlook, it will simply not work in Teams, and the other way around. We want to solve this with universal actions. So here is what we're doing. This is a more, let's say, I was going to say accurate, but it's a more deep dive into the diagram that was shown to you earlier in this deck. The reality when it comes to the card authoring experience is that you don't just author one card if you want to target multiple hosts. You have to author a variant for Outlook, a variant for Teams, and you might even want a variant for your own application. Sure, there is a common layout, but the action model is not the same. Similarly, in your backend, you might want to expose the services that handle the actions differently. Actually, it's not that you might want, it's that you have to. When it comes to Outlook actionable messages, you need to have a web service. It might be any web service for that matter, the interface that you choose, and that needs to be available for Outlook to call directly into. When you're authoring a service for Teams, that is a bot, well, you need to comply with the way bots are typically authored. You will probably use the bot builder SDK. And when you're authoring something that works in your custom application, you're basically on your own. We have no guidance. That means that you have to implement multiple things multiple times, even though there is a common card layout. I want to bring that chart, that diagram, back to what we showed you at the beginning. So here is how we're doing it. As you can see at the bottom of this payload, there's a new action type called action.execute. Essentially, a card authored with that new action.execute is basically guaranteed to run in Outlook and Teams and probably more Microsoft properties in the future. Just the same, they can work in your own application. On top of that, action.execute has a semantic model where the backend can return an updated card that is meant to replace the one that the action was taken from. This way you can very easily implement step-by-step scenarios like is already possible to do in Outlook today. So we're bringing this feature to Teams as well. On top of that, we're also introducing an automatic refresh model as shown at the top of this card. With this, you can actually have the host initiate a card refresh model by calling into your backend so as to retrieve an up-to-date view of the data, or even to craft just in time a card that is tailored to the particular user or to the particular user role for the user who's viewing the card. So really that diagram that I was just showing you, at that point, we are simplifying to this next one. A command card that you now have to author using the action.execute action type. A command backend, no need to have variants for Teams, for Outlook, or your own application. And a command protocol that makes it possible for Outlook, Teams, or your application to talk to that backend. But then you might have questions. How am I supposed to implement that backend? And what is the protocol that runs between the backend and the various hosts? Well, the answer to that is that we are standardizing on bots and the bot activity protocol. Why are we doing this? Well, it so happens that the bot framework and bot development has a lot of engagement. We have plenty of developers out there using the bot framework currently. There's a great set of tools, including SDKs for easily building those bots. And the bot activity protocol is very well defined. So we are standardizing on that, hoping that a lot of developers will actually be able to reuse skills that they already have, and that Outlook developers will find it extremely easy to move to that new model. And of course, when it comes to hosting those little applications, those little Adaptive Card V2 in your own applications, implementing a bot should be just as easy for you as when it is when you want to integrate within Teams. And with that, I'm going to go into a demo. So this is a very early sneak peek. This feature is not shipping immediately, but you're going to see a universal action model run in various hosts with a single backend implementation and a single card payload. I'm actually going to show you universal actions in action in 3 different environments. The first one is the one that's on the screen right now, and that's the web chat control, which is the control that the bot framework provides so that you can embed communication with a bot or interaction with a bot into your own web application. So this is a very, very simple scenario. It's about catering and my ability to place an order for food. Do not expect to see something that's like in real life. This is really a proof of the technology more than anything else. So in that particular bot, I'm going to type the word start. I could have typed anything I wanted. This is just a way for me to invoke the bot and have it send that initial card. So here you can see I can order chicken or beef or even vegan or do a customer order. I love beef, so I'm going to hit beef. As you can see, that card has been refreshed in place. So what happened under the covers is that there was an action.execute encoded in that card that went to the bot, and the bot responded with a new card that makes it possible for me to now order drink. I'm going to order water, click that button. The card has refreshed yet again, summarizing my order and allowing me to confirm. I'm going to hit the confirm button, and now I see that my order has been confirmed, and I can even click that button to see recent orders. Now you have a card here that shows what's been recently ordered. As you can see right now, the card updates itself automatically, and it's going to do that 3 times, and then it's going to pause. Okay, so this is a scenario that shows action.execute working in the web chat control, and the ability for a card to be refreshed as a result of an action being executed, as well as the card automatically refreshing itself. Great, but what we really want to show is that this exact same scenario works in the context of Outlook. And it so happens that I have done that earlier on. I have actually sent a card to that account. Actually, this is the exact same card that I was interacting with before. So it's actually not showing what I want. I'm going to go back there, and I have a little utility here that makes it possible for me to send another email to that account to show the scenario in action. I'm going to wait for it to arrive. Click on that email here. You see that exact same card. And when I say it's the exact same card, the code in the bot is really the exact same one. So I'm going to order chicken this time. I'm going to order tea. I'm going to confirm that order. And I'm going to see the list of recent orders. And you can see my order is there. And if I go back to this one and start over that refresh process, you can see now there is chicken and tea that's been ordered just a moment ago. So this is the same exact scenario working in 2 completely different environments, web chat as well as Outlook. But what about Teams? Teams is a hugely important client. Here is the exact same scenario, again, working in Teams. This time I'm going to order custom. I'm going to say fish, hit that custom button, wait for the card to refresh. I'm going to order coffee. I'm going to confirm that order. And again, I'm going to see recent orders. This is, again, yet the exact same scenario working in, this is not where I wanted to go. I wanted to go back there to just show that, again, if I restart that thing, you can see the order. So a little proof that we're actually running the same code. This is the code of the bot. I'm not going to go through it because there's more than just this portion, but this is the method called onInvokeActivityAsync that actually runs my bot. This is the exact same code, and the exact same card payloads are being used throughout without the bot ever checking which endpoint actually called it. It doesn't know that it's web chat or Outlook or Teams. It just behaves in exactly one way, and that way is compatible across the board. A single implementation now makes it possible for you to target multiple hosts seamlessly. We hope that's actually going to solve a lot of headaches and completely streamline the development process. So, as mentioned before, why we're using the bot framework and standardizing on that? Well, a lot of developer skills that we want to leverage, and developers to be able to reuse what they've learned. A lot of SDKs, plenty of great tools that you can leverage. I've also mentioned that you'd be able, as a developer, to host Adaptive Card v2 in your own applications. For that, we're going to ship a set of SDKs for all the platforms that Adaptive Card supports. Those will either be separate SDKs or extensions of the Adaptive Card SDKs. They will make it super easy to pass in an Adaptive Card v2 payload and have the SDK handle everything for you, including running actions. When will this be available is kind of an open question. We hope to have something available in preview by the end of this calendar year, but it's totally possible that we actually slip a little bit into 2021. And that's it for Universal Actions. I'm going to hand it over back to Matt.
Great. Thanks, David. We're really excited to see Universal Actions come to be. Now we've got another early preview on something we're calling card author services. And it's one of those features that the easiest way to understand it is to switch right to a demo. So card author services, the best way to understand it is we've got a designer, we've got a set of backend templating SDKs, but there's still that manual step. That's somewhat kludgy. I had to copy paste this. You saw me escape these quotes. I have to paste it into a variable. Maybe I'm in a bigger organization that has a designer that's separate from the developer, and they're used to the design tool. So now they have to either email it or send it via OneDrive. So there has to be an exchange of this card from one party to the other. Card author services is designed to be a turnkey integrated experience. And the way that looks right here, we've got it rolled out for Microsoft employees at this website. It's an integrated dashboard where I can click on new card and you'll see the adaptive card designer that you're familiar with all integrated right here. I can make a card. I can say, hello world. I've got my sample data editor. I can save this card, and because it's a demo, this is probably demo card, takes 723. I can give it tags. I can do whatever I do with this, save that card. And this is the cool thing. Now I can publish it. And when I publish this card, I can see who's the author, who's collaborating. I can see how many people have used it. And what's really neat is now I can just take this ID, and now back in my .NET project, I'd add a project called Adaptive Card Authoring Services. And this isn't quite available yet, but to give you a glimpse at how simple this code is, let's make another endpoint called Card Author Services. We'll grab that same data object. We'll add our using statements, Adaptive Cards Authoring Services. And with Card Author Services, I can say bind template, and I'll paste in that template ID that I previously had. So this is a template I created with this data. So now you'll see instead of that payload being pasted directly in here, now I'm just giving it an ID that's going to be mapped up to that backend. And if I hit F5 here, we'll see this actually render that card dynamically from the front end. which is really neat because now if I ever want to go back to this while that's building, let's see if I want to make a new version of this card, because cards, any good one, it's going to have multiple versions. I click on new version, the card designer comes in, I can add a new text block called V2, hit save, and I can publish V2. Let's actually see if this works. Card author services. With any luck, we'll get our card that we created. There we go. We got an adaptive card, said hello, text V2. Now, what's really cool, let's just close this feature up. Let's edit in Designer. Let's go from V2. We're going to go all the way. This is going to be V3 of this card. And in V3, the text got huge. We really want to emphasize it. So we hit save, we hit publish. And now, as I go over here and refresh, look at that. I've got a whole new adaptive card from my web API. I didn't have to change the code, didn't have to copy and paste any template. And if I have a designer on board, they can simply come in this really nice portal, edit this card. I can see the different versions that have existed from it. I can go back to previous ones, edit the designer. I can see it's actually had 3 requests hit. So it's live showing me which are my most popular card templates. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that we're not going to get into. But what this really offers is a very rich, integrated way for organizations to manage card templates. And we'll have a link where you can get started and when to expect card author services later on. So we hope you like that look at card author services. It should really streamline the process of card authors just using these cards, rapidly using them to the back end and just getting through it. Here's a look at what this looks like, what we're planning on shipping as we get to our roadmap. We showed you the card management front end and an early sneak peek at a .NET backend. And the way this works is very simple. You just install the SDK and you now have full access to all of your own internal templates to your organization. But if you're not necessarily a .NET backend developer, we didn't want to leave the Power Automate folks out. And we'll have a custom connector that you can use in your flows to have a true end-to-end no code experience for creating cards, using them within business processes, and actually displaying them to Teams or Outlook or whatever else you want to do with Power Automate without writing a single line of code. So the summary of card author services is we're really positioning it at turnkey solutions for card authors. It will be self-hostable. So I showed you our version of the website that we have deployed for Microsoft, but you would deploy this and host this on your own. There's a REST API to manage the templates, the integrated front end that you saw. It has configurable storage, so you can store the templates in SQL, GitHub, a SharePoint list, OneDrive, and it has configurable authentication with whatever authentication provider you happen to use. And as mentioned, a Power Automate connector, so you can just automatically use these templates from within your flows. So here's a look at what the world looks like with templating, universal actions, and card author services. We have a much tighter card author loop where you can design a card and take advantage of it in a very integrated way. And have a standardized way for your backend to handle actions from Teams or Outlook and maybe refresh that card with up-to-date content. And so, David, why don't you give us a look at the roadmap and when we can expect to see some of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about a lot of things today: rendering, actions, templating, the card designer, and the author services. When are those coming to you guys? Well, version 1.x, the next release of the 1. Release, which we expect to ship in the next few months, will address accessibility. We've had a couple of issues with accessibility with cards. What we want is for them to be accessible by default right out of the box. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to that in the next release. Similarly, we've had a very requested feature around input validation. Right now, inputs, you just type stuff in it, and as actions are executed, you might get an error from the server saying that the value doesn't match what it expects. Well, we're going to have client-side baked-in input validation in that next release, which will make implementing scenarios a lot easier, we hope. We're also going to introduce scalable glyphs. If you've ever designed an adaptive card payload, you know that if you want little icons in your cards, you currently have to use images. And while that kind of works on high DPI screens, it's not ideal. You never know what dimensions you need to author your image in. And And sometimes it gets shrunk down, sometimes it gets blown up. It's not ideal. So we're going to fix that with a set of glyphs that scale nicely across all screens. And we're also going to address a set of platform inconsistencies that we've identified so that the JavaScript SDK behaves the same as the UWP SDK and the same as the .NET SDK, etc. In the world of templating, we've already mentioned that our SDKs for .NET and JavaScript are coming in this next release. And in terms of the card designer, we're also going to look at accessibility to make sure that it's usable by the majority of you out there. And the version selector will also be made available alongside the templating support with the bind feature. Now, post 1.x, we're going to introduce the first version of the 2.x release plan. That's going to address the universal action feature that we just mentioned a few minutes ago. And as far as templating goes, we're going to push the boundaries a little further by offering native SDKs for the mobile platforms, iOS and Android. 2.x is also when we're going to start working on the card author services. Hopefully we can get a lot of help from you on that and a lot of insights as to what you'd like to see in there. And once we're done with all of that, which should happen during the year 2021. And by the way, the universal action, as I mentioned earlier, we hope to have some preview a little earlier within the 2020. So once all of that is on the way, we're going to start thinking about our 3.0 or 3.x release. And in there, we want to take templating even one more step further by introducing what we refer to as live data binding. So essentially a way to have a single card bind to a data object and be able to react to changes in the properties of that data object without fully re-rendering itself. This will enable great scenarios like you can currently achieve using React or XAML for UWP. And on top of that, this is when we're actually going to probably release the card author service, so the 2021 timeframe, with all the features that we hope you're going to let us know you want to see in there. So that's it for the roadmap. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, David. So this is really where we're getting to. This is how we see the world, with finally getting to a world where we have true industry-supported card exchange between different apps, between different backends, with live data binding, with card author services, and a real world where you can start exchanging these cards and they're actionable and updating in real time. We showed you a whole bunch of stuff today, so we'll close out with the resources slide. If you're interested, we'd love to see you every month at our monthly community calls. They take place on the second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time, so you can join us, see myself and David, and see what's up with the latest and greatest. For everything templating, take a look at this link. Learn more about adaptive expressions. If you really want to help us build card author services and get it earlier than we see in the roadmap, that link will help you get started. You can get started with the code today. And really let us know what features to invest in at the AC roadmap link. That's your opportunity to help steer the course of this project. And of course, you can find us on Twitter. We'll do our best to reach out to you. You can find me at Matt Heidinger.
And you can find me at dcloaks. Actually, why do I say that? I'm French. Dcloak.
Okay. And that's all we had. Thanks everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thanks very much for attending.